What would you do if the person you trusted most in the world looked you in the eyes and chose to let you drown? Sarah Morrison found out the answer on a stormy night when her husband pushed her car off a bridge. She was 7 months pregnant with twins. She was trapped, and she watched through the window as he walked away, leaving her to die in the freezing water below. But here is the thing about Sarah Morrison. She refused to stay dead. This is the story of how one woman survived the unsurvivable, crawled back from the grave, and destroyed the man who tried to erase her. It has betrayal, it has revenge, and it has a courtroom showdown that will leave you speechless. Fair warning, this story gets dark before it gets light. There are 3 moments where Sarah hits rock bottom. There are 2 times she thinks she has won, only to have victory ripped away. And there is one twist at the end that changes everything. So buckle up. Because what happens next is going to make you believe that justice is not just possible, it is inevitable. Let's begin. It started with a phone Sarah Morrison was never supposed to find. She had been searching for Ryan's reading glasses in his home office, opening drawers with the casual confidence of a wife who had nothing to hide and expected the same in return. 7 months pregnant with twins, she moved slowly, one hand supporting her lower back as she rifled through the desk drawers. That is when her fingers brushed against smooth glass tucked beneath a stack of legal files. A second phone, brand new, expensive, hidden. Sarah's heart began to pound. She told herself it could be nothing. A work phone, a backup device, something perfectly innocent. But her hands were already shaking as she pressed the power button. The phone unlocked without a passcode. Ryan had been careless, or perhaps he had never imagined his pregnant wife would go searching through his private office. The screen filled with messages, hundreds of them, all from one contact saved simply as A. Sarah scrolled through the texts, her breath catching with each swipe. The messages were intimate, explicit, and damning. But it was not the affair that made her sink into Ryan's leather chair. It was what came next. Photos, screenshots, bank statements, wire transfers. $8.7 million moved through offshore accounts. Client trust funds, embezzled, laundered, hidden. Her husband, the respected senior partner at Morrison and Associates, was not just a cheater. He was a criminal. Sarah's legal training kicked in immediately. She opened her email on the hidden phone and forwarded every single file to her personal account. Her fingers flew across the screen as she photographed documents, saved screenshots, and created a digital trail that Ryan could not erase. She should have left the house immediately. She should have driven straight to the FBI. She should have called her brother, called a lawyer, called anyone. Instead, she made the worst decision of her life. She confronted him. Ryan came home that evening carrying takeout from her favorite restaurant, playing the role of attentive husband with practiced ease. He kissed her forehead, asked about her day, placed a gentle hand on her swollen belly. Sarah felt sick. "I found your phone," she said quietly. Ryan froze. For just a moment, his mask slipped. She saw a calculation flash across his face before the concern returned. "What phone, honey?" "The one hidden in your desk. The one with messages from A. The one with evidence that you have been stealing millions from your clients." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ryan set down the takeout bag slowly. When he looked at her again, his eyes were cold. This was not the man she had married. This was someone else entirely. "Sarah," he said carefully, "you are stressed. The pregnancy hormones are making you paranoid. You are not thinking clearly." "I photographed everything," she said. "I sent it to myself. I have proof." His jaw tightened. "That was a mistake. The only mistake was trusting you." Ryan moved toward her, and Sarah instinctively stepped back. Her hand went to her belly protectively. She had seen something in his expression that terrified her. This was not anger. It was cold, calculated fear. "We need to talk about this privately," Ryan said. "Away from the house. Let me drive you somewhere we can discuss this calmly." Every instinct screamed at Sarah to refuse, but she was tired, pregnant, and still clinging to the foolish hope that the man she loved was somewhere inside this stranger. "Fine," she said. "Let's talk." She did not know that Ryan had already made a phone call. She did not know that Amber Pierce, his mistress and executive assistant, was waiting in the trunk of his Mercedes. She did not know that Ryan had already decided she was a problem that needed to be eliminated. They drove in silence through Manhattan as the sky darkened. Storm clouds gathered overhead, thick and menacing. Rain began to fall, first as a drizzle, then as a downpour that hammered against the windshield. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked as they crossed into Westchester County. "Bear Mountain Bridge. We can park at the overlook. No one will interrupt us there." The rain intensified. Lightning cracked across the sky. Sarah's unease grew with every mile. She reached for her phone, but Ryan had taken it from her purse while she was not looking. "Ryan, I want to go home." "We are almost there." When they reached the bridge overlook, Ryan parked at the edge where the guardrail overlooked the Hudson River far below. The storm raged around them. Through the rain-streaked windows, Sarah could barely see the water churning beneath the bridge. Ryan turned to face her. "I am sorry it came to this." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, she heard movement from the back of the car. The trunk latch released from inside the vehicle. A moment later, the rear door opened. Amber Pierce climbed into the back seat, soaking wet and shivering. Her mascara ran down her cheeks. She looked at Sarah with something between guilt and terror. "Ryan, please," Amber whispered. "You said we were just going to talk to her." Understanding crashed over Sarah like ice water. The child locks, the remote location, the storm. This was not a conversation. This was a plan. "Let me out," Sarah said, pulling at the door handle. It would not open. "Ryan, let me out right now." Ryan climbed out of the driver's seat. Amber followed, stumbling in the rain. Through the window, Sarah watched in horror as Ryan positioned himself behind the Mercedes. "Help me!" Sarah screamed, pounding on the windows. "Somebody help me!" But they were alone on the storm-ravaged overlook. No cars passed. No witnesses appeared. Ryan and Amber put their hands on the back of the car and began to push. The Mercedes rolled forward slowly at first, then gained momentum. Sarah threw her body against the door, but the child locks held firm. She twisted in her seat, trying to reach the front to shift into park, but her pregnant belly made it impossible. "Ryan, no, please, the babies!" Her husband's face appeared in the rain-streaked window for just a moment. His expression was blank, empty. He had already decided she was dead. The front tires hit the guardrail with a shriek of metal. The car tilted forward at a sickening angle. For one suspended moment, Sarah could see nothing but dark sky and darker water below. Then the Mercedes tipped over the edge. The fall felt both instant and eternal. Sarah's stomach lurched as gravity took hold. She heard herself screaming, a sound of pure animal terror that was swallowed by the storm. The impact with the water was devastating. The windshield exploded inward. Freezing river water rushed through the shattered glass, filling the cabin in seconds. The cold was so intense it felt like knives against Sarah's skin. She gasped, and water filled her mouth, her nose, her lungs. The car sank fast, nose first. Water pressure crushed against Sarah's chest. She clawed at her seatbelt, but her fingers were already numb. The buckle would not release. Through the flooding cabin, Sarah saw shapes moving above the waterline. Ryan and Amber standing at the guardrail, watching, waiting to make sure she did not surface. Sarah's lungs burned. Her vision began to darken at the edges. She pressed her hands against her belly, feeling her babies move inside her one last time. "I am so sorry," she whispered into the water. Mama tried. Mama tried so hard." The car settled onto the river bottom. Darkness closed in. Sarah's body went limp against the seatbelt. The last thing she remembered was the taste of river water and the distant sound of thunder fading away. Above, on the bridge, Ryan pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Help!" he shouted into the phone, his voice cracking with manufactured panic. "My wife, she jumped from the bridge. I tried to stop her, but she was hysterical. Please send help." Amber stood beside him, shaking him violently. "What did we do?" she whispered. "Ryan, what did we just do?" "We did what we had to do," Ryan said coldly. "She was going to destroy everything. My career, my family name, my future. She was pregnant. She was a threat." Ryan grabbed Amber's arm hard enough to bruise. "Listen to me very carefully. We were driving. She got upset about the affair, and she jumped out of the moving car before I could stop her. We searched for her in the rain but could not find her. That is the story. Do you understand?" Amber nodded, tears mixing with rain on her face. Say it. She jumped, Amber whispered. We tried to stop her. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Ryan arranged his expression into one of devastated grief. He had practiced this face in the mirror many times. He knew exactly how to play a grieving husband. When the officers arrived, they found Ryan collapsed against the guardrail, sobbing. Amber sat in the passenger seat of a police car, wrapped in a blanket, saying nothing. The official report would read, Sarah Morrison, 32-year-old, 7 months pregnant with twins, jumped from Bear Mountain Bridge during a severe storm. Presumed deceased, recovery efforts ongoing. No one thought to question the husband's story. Not yet. 2 miles downstream, where the current had carried the submerged Mercedes, a kayaker named Tom Hutchins was trying to get off the water before the storm killed him. He paddled hard toward shore, cursing himself for being out this late. That was when he saw it. A pale hand pressed against the inside of a car window, barely visible beneath the dark water. Tom did not hesitate. He called 911 while paddling toward the submerged vehicle. There is someone trapped in a car in the river. I can see a hand. She is still moving. Emergency services arrived within minutes. Divers plunged into the freezing water. The first diver to reach the Mercedes reported back with urgency in his voice. We have a female victim, late 20s or early 30s, appears to be heavily pregnant. She has a pulse. Repeat, she has a pulse, but it is very weak. We need the jaws of life now. They worked frantically to cut Sarah free. The seatbelt had saved her life by keeping her head in an air pocket near the roof of the car, but it now trapped her underwater. Every second counted. When they finally pulled Sarah's body from the river, she was blue-lipped and unresponsive. A paramedic immediately began CPR while the helicopter lowered a rescue basket. Come on, the paramedic muttered, compressing Sarah's chest. Come on, stay with us. Your babies need you to stay with us. Sarah's body convulsed. Water poured from her mouth. She gasped once, twice, then stopped breathing again. They loaded her into the helicopter and flew toward Poughkeepsie Medical Center, the nearest hospital equipped to handle both trauma and high-risk pregnancy. During the flight, Sarah's heart stopped twice. Both times they brought her back. At the hospital, Dr. Marcus Webb, the head of emergency medicine, took one look at the waterlogged pregnant woman and immediately called for every specialist available. Get me obstetrics, get me hypothermia protocol, and somebody tell me right now if those babies have heartbeats. The ultrasound revealed devastating news. 2 heartbeats before the accident. Only 1 heartbeat now. 1 twin had been lost. Save the one we can save, Dr. Webb ordered, and save the mother. Move. They worked through the night. Sarah remained in a medically induced coma while her body slowly warmed. Her core temperature had dropped to 87 degrees. By all medical logic, she should be dead. But Sarah Morrison was a fighter. Even unconscious, even broken, she refused to give up. 3 days passed before the hospital realized they had no idea who she was. Sarah had no identification on her. Her purse, her phone, everything had been left in Ryan's Mercedes, which was now sitting in an evidence lot while police investigated the suicide attempt. The hospital listed her as Jane Doe. Unknown female, approximate age 30, approximately 28 weeks pregnant, rescued from submersion incident. Nobody connected the woman in Poughkeepsie Medical Center with Sarah Morrison, the pregnant wife who had allegedly jumped from a bridge 50 miles north. Ryan, meanwhile, was playing his role perfectly. He held a press conference outside his Manhattan office, his face carefully arranged in an expression of devastated grief. Cameras flashed as he spoke. My wife Sarah was struggling with severe prenatal depression, Ryan said, his voice breaking at precisely the right moment. I tried to get her help, but she refused treatment. The night of the storm, she became increasingly agitated during our drive. Before I could stop her, she opened the car door and jumped. I searched for hours in the rain, but I could not find her. A reporter called out, Mr. Morrison, witnesses report seeing 2 people in the vehicle with you that night. Ryan did not miss a beat. My assistant Amber Pierce was with us. Sarah had insisted on confronting her about my admitted affair. It was a terrible mistake to bring them together. I take full responsibility for that error in judgment. So you admit to the affair? Yes, I was unfaithful to my wife during a difficult time in our marriage. I will regret that for the rest of my life. But I never wanted Sarah to be hurt. Ryan's eyes glistened with what might have been real tears, or might have been excellent acting. I loved her. I love her still. And I pray every day that somehow she survived. The press ate it up. Headlines appeared within hours. Manhattan attorney admits affair as pregnant wife remains missing. The narrative was set. Ryan was the flawed but grieving husband. Sarah was the unstable woman who had tragically taken her own life. Only Amber knew the truth, and Amber was too terrified to speak. Ryan visited her apartment the night after the press conference. He did not knock. He had a key. He walked in to find Amber curled on her couch, staring at nothing. "We need to talk," Ryan said. "I cannot do this," Amber whispered. "Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. She was screaming for us to stop. Her babies, Ryan. She was begging us to save her babies." Oh, Ryan sat beside Amber and took her hand. His touch was gentle, but his words were ice. "Listen to me very carefully. You are an accomplice to attempted murder. If Sarah is found alive, if she tells anyone what really happened, you will go to prison for 20 years minimum. Your entire life gone." Amber pulled her hand away. "What if she is alive? What if someone found her?" "Then we stick to the story. She jumped. We tried to stop her. She was unstable. It is our word against hers, and who will believe a woman with documented mental health issues over a respected attorney and his frightened assistant? I cannot lie in court." Ryan's expression hardened. "You already lied to the police. You are in this now, Amber. There is no way out except through. We stay calm, we stay consistent, and we wait for the investigation to close. Then we can move on with our lives." Amber wanted to believe him. She had invested too much in this relationship to admit it was all a terrible mistake. So she nodded and agreed to keep lying. What neither of them knew was that Amber had been keeping insurance. For months, she had been recording conversations with Ryan on her phone. Not because she planned to betray him, but because she had learned long ago that powerful men were dangerous to trust completely. The recordings were saved to a cloud account Ryan did not know existed. Back at Poughkeepsie Medical Center, Sarah began to wake. The first sensation was pain. Everything hurt. Her chest, her ribs, her throat. She tried to open her eyes, but the light was too bright. A sound escaped her throat, somewhere between a moan and a whimper. "She is waking up," a nurse said. "Page Dr. Webb?" Sarah's eyes fluttered open. Blurry shapes moved around her. Machines beeped. The smell of antiseptic filled her nose. "Where?" Sarah croaked. Her throat felt like shattered glass. "Where am I?" "You are in the hospital," a gentle voice said. A woman's face came into focus above her. Kind eyes, graying hair. "You were in an accident. You are safe now." Safe. The words seemed like a lie. Memory crashed back in waves, the car, the water. Ryan's blank expression as he pushed her toward death. "My babies." Sarah tried to sit up, but her body would not cooperate. "Please, my babies." The nurse pressed a gentle hand to Sarah's shoulder. "One baby is stable. I am so sorry, but we lost the other twin in the accident." The grief was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah turned her head and sobbed, her whole body shaking. Olivia was gone. She had felt 2 heartbeats inside her for months, and now there was only one. But Emma survived. One daughter still needed her. Dr. Webb arrived and performed a quick examination. "Do you remember what happened?" he asked. Sarah's mouth opened, then closed. The truth sat on her tongue, desperate to be spoken. "My husband tried to kill me. He pushed the car into the river with me trapped inside." But fear stopped her. If she told the truth, would anyone believe her? Ryan was beloved, respected, powerful. She was just a woman who had been foolish enough to trust him. And if Ryan learned she had served, he would try again. She was certain of it. "I do not remember," Sarah lied. "Everything is blank after getting in the car." Dr. Webb nodded sympathetically. "Trauma can cause memory loss. It may come back with time, or it may not. Right now, your focus needs to be on recovery." "Does anyone know I am here?" Sarah asked. "Has anyone called looking for me?" "No, we have had you listed as Jane Doe. You had no identification when you were rescued." Relief and terror mixed in Sarah's chest. Ryan thought she was dead. For now, that might be the only thing keeping her alive. 3 weeks passed. Sarah's name appeared in the news as Sarah Morrison, missing and presumed deceased. Her photo appeared on the evening broadcast, and a nurse recognized her immediately. "That is our Jane Doe," the nurse exclaimed. The hospital called the number listed for next of kin. Ryan Morrison answered on the first ring. Within 2 hours, Ryan arrived at the hospital with photographers documenting his tearful reunion with his wife. He rushed into Sarah's room and fell to his knees beside her bed. "Thank God," he sobbed, gripping her hand. "Sarah, I thought I had lost you forever." Sarah looked at her husband and felt nothing but cold terror. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell everyone in the room what he had done. But Ryan's eyes held a warning even as fake tears streamed down his face. "I do not remember what happened," Sarah said carefully. Ryan's expression showed relief for just a fraction of a second before concern returned. "The doctor said you might have memory loss. That is all right. We will get through this together." The hospital psychiatrist arrived the next day. Dr. Helen Price was a thin woman with sharp eyes and a notepad she wrote in constantly. She sat across from Sarah and smiled warmly. "How are you feeling today, Sarah?" "Tired, sad about losing Olivia." "That is completely understandable. Losing a child is devastating trauma." Dr. Price consulted her notes. "Your husband mentioned you were experiencing prenatal depression before the accident. Were you having thoughts of harming yourself?" Sarah's blood went cold. "No, never. He also mentioned you had been refusing treatment. Is that true?" "I was not depressed. I was upset about discovering his affair, but I would never hurt myself or my babies." Dr. Price wrote something down. "Sometimes depression manifests as denial. It is very common." Sarah realized what was happening. Ryan had built a narrative of an unstable, suicidal wife. Now he was using medical professionals to cement that story. "I am not suicidal," Sarah said firmly. "Of course not. But given the circumstances and the risk to your unborn child, I am recommending a 72-hour psychiatric hold for observation." "You cannot do that. I am not a danger to anyone." "Your husband has expressed serious concerns. He has signed consent forms for involuntary commitment if necessary." Sarah felt the walls closing in. If they committed her to psychiatric care, her credibility would be destroyed forever. No court would believe a woman who had been institutionalized. She forced herself to take a deep breath and think like a lawyer. "What do I need to do to avoid commitment?" Dr. Price looked surprised by the directness. "Demonstrate stability. Cooperate with treatment. Show us you can care for yourself and your baby safely." Sarah smiled. It felt like wearing a mask. "I can do that. I want to do that. I just want to go home and heal with my daughter." Over the next 3 days, Sarah played the model patient. She attended therapy sessions. She took the medications they prescribed. She spoke calmly and rationally about her trauma. She admitted she had been under stress, but insisted she was committed to recovery. It worked. Dr. Price signed off on her release. But Sarah's freedom came with conditions. She was released to Ryan's care. A court-ordered ankle monitor was placed on her leg, allegedly to prevent another suicide attempt. All her accounts were frozen pending a competency hearing. Sarah returned to their Manhattan penthouse as a prisoner in everything but name. Ryan played the attentive husband for the home health nurse who visited daily. The moment they were alone, his mask dropped. "If you even think about telling anyone what really happened," Ryan whispered as Sarah sat on the couch with baby Emma in her arms, "I will have you committed permanently. No one will believe a woman with documented mental health issues and memory problems. You will lose Emma. You will lose everything." Sarah held her daughter closer. Emma was 2 weeks old now, tiny and perfect, and completely dependent on her mother's protection. "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why did you try to kill us?" Ryan's laugh was bitter. "You were going to destroy me, turn me into the FBI for the embezzlement, ruin my family name. I could not let that happen. So you tried to murder your pregnant wife. I did what I had to do, and I will do it again if you force my hand." Ryan stood and adjusted his tie. "I have a meeting. The nurse will be here in an hour. Do not do anything stupid." After he left, Sarah sat in the silent penthouse and tried to figure out how to survive. She had no money, no phone, no way to contact anyone. The ankle monitor tracked her every movement. She was utterly alone. But Sarah was not the type to give up easily. She began to plan. 2 weeks after Sarah's return home, Ryan escalated his psychological warfare. He needed Sarah completely discredited before she remembered too much or found a way to contact authorities. Late one evening, while Sarah was feeding Emma in the nursery, Ryan staged his masterpiece. He left the penthouse through the service entrance, circled around to the building's loading dock, then used his key to re-enter through the parking garage. He took the freight elevator to avoid security cameras in the main lobby. Once back in the penthouse, he moved through the rooms quickly and quietly, overturning furniture and emptying drawers. Then he left again the same way he had come. 20 minutes later, he called 911 from his office downtown. "My wife is having a mental health crisis," Ryan said, his voice shaking. "She just called me, screaming incoherently. She is alone with our newborn baby. I am terrified she is going to hurt herself or the child. Please send someone immediately." Police arrived in the penthouse to find Sarah sitting on the floor of the nursery, holding Emma and crying. The apartment was in chaos around her. Furniture overturned, belongings scattered, clear signs of a violent episode. "Ma'am, we need you to put the baby down," the first officer said gently. "I did not do this," Sarah said. "Someone broke in. I heard noises and grabbed Emma and hid in here. I did not do this." The officers exchanged glances. They had been briefed by dispatch. Mentally unstable woman, recent suicide attempt, court-ordered monitoring. This looked exactly like what they had been told to expect. "Let's just make sure everyone is safe," the officer said. "Put the baby down and let us check you over." Sarah knew how this looked. She knew what Ryan had done, but there was no way to prove it. That was when she heard a voice from the hallway. "Excuse me, officers?" An elderly woman appeared in the doorway. Sarah had seen her before, the neighbor from across the hall. Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher, maybe 70 years old, wearing a flowered robe and carrying an iPad. "I live across the hall," Dorothy said. "I could not help but overhear the commotion. Before you take this young lady anywhere, you might want to see something." Dorothy pulled up a video on her iPad. "My grandson set up security cameras for me after I was burglarized last year. One of them points at the hallway. I just checked the footage from tonight." The video showed Ryan leaving his penthouse at 8:43, clearly visible despite his attempt to use the service areas. The timestamp was irrefutable. "That is her husband," Dorothy said, "leaving the apartment 23 minutes before he called you saying his wife was having a crisis. Now, why would a man stage a break-in in his own home and then call the police on his mentally fragile wife?" The officers looked at each other, then at Ryan, who had just arrived on the scene looking appropriately worried. "Mr. Morrison, can you explain this?" Ryan's face went through several expressions before settling on confused concern. "I left to get her medication from the pharmacy. I thought she would be fine for 30 minutes. The pharmacy is 2 blocks away. This video shows you heading toward the parking garage. I moved my car first." It was weak, and everyone knew it. But without more evidence, the police could not arrest Ryan Morrison, respected attorney, for trashing his own apartment. After the officers left with a warning to both parties, Dorothy Fletcher took Sarah aside. "Come with me, honey," Dorothy said. In Dorothy's apartment, which smelled like lavender and old books, Sarah finally broke down. "He tried to kill me," she sobbed. "He pushed my car into the river. He is going to keep trying until I am dead or committed." Dorothy handed Sarah a tissue. "I figured it was something like that. That man's shadier than my ex-husband Harold, and he ran off with the church secretary and the bingo money." Despite everything, Sarah almost laughed. "I saved that video," Dorothy continued, "and I can save more. My cameras record everything in this hallway. If he tries anything else, we will have proof." "He will come after you too," Sarah warned. "He destroys anyone who gets in his way." Dorothy smiled grimly. "Honey, I am 73 years old. I buried one husband, divorced another, and survived breast cancer twice. I am not scared of some overpaid lawyer with a God complex." For the first time since the bridge, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. She was not completely alone. Sarah used Dorothy's phone to call the only lawyer she knew outside of Ryan's circle. Jack Donnelly had been her parents' attorney years ago for their small business. He was semi-retired now, but he had always told Sarah to call if she ever needed anything. Jack answered on the third ring. "Donnelly." "Mr. Donnelly, this is Sarah Morrison. I do not know if you remember me." "Sarah, of course I remember. I heard about your accident. How are you holding up?" "I need help. legal help, and I need you to not tell anyone I called. There was a pause. When Jack spoke again, his tone had sharpened. Tell me everything. Sarah told him. The embezzlement, the affair, the bridge, Ryan's campaign to have her committed, everything. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Jack asked. I have an ankle monitor. I can only go certain places. Then I will come to you. I will bring documents that make it look like a standard post-hospitalization evaluation. Your husband will not question it. Thank you, Sarah whispered. Sarah, if what you are telling me is true, we are not just talking about a divorce. We are talking about attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. This is a federal case. I know, but I need evidence. I need something that will make people believe me over him. Then that is what we will get. Jack Donnelly came to the penthouse the next day carrying a briefcase and an official-looking clipboard. He introduced himself to Ryan as a social worker conducting a post-hospitalization welfare check. Ryan bought it completely. Of course, whatever Sarah needs. I will be in my office if you need anything. In the nursery, Jack and Sarah spoke in whispers while Emma slept in her bassinet. I saved the embezzlement evidence to my personal email, Sarah said. Dorothy Fletcher has video of Ryan leaving the apartment before he staged the break-in. My medical records show injuries inconsistent with jumping from a bridge. We have a case. Jack nodded, taking notes. I am going to file for emergency custody and a restraining order tomorrow. We will present all of this to a judge and Ryan will not see it coming. Sarah felt something she had not felt in weeks. Relief. When? I will have the papers ready by Friday. We will serve him at his office in front of his colleagues. Maximum embarrassment, minimum opportunity for him to retaliate. That night, Sarah slept better than she had since the bridge. She dreamed of a future where she and Emma were safe, where Ryan was behind bars, where justice was finally served. She woke to the smell of smoke. Sarah jolted upright in bed, her heart hammering. Smoke detectors were screaming. Through the bedroom door, she could see flames crawling across the living room wall. Emma! Sarah ran to the nursery, scooped up her daughter, and ran for the front door. It was locked from the outside. The deadbolt that was never engaged was somehow thrown. She ran to the windows. They were 30 stories up. No escape. The smoke was getting thicker. Emma was screaming. Sarah wrapped her daughter in a wet towel and called 911 on the landline. There is a fire at Morrison Tower, penthouse apartment. I am trapped inside with my baby. She smashed a window with a chair, letting in fresh air but also feeding oxygen to the flames. Firefighters arrived within minutes. They broke down the front door and pulled Sarah and Emma to safety. Outside, wrapped in emergency blankets, Sarah watched her home burn. Everything she owned, every piece of evidence she had saved, every photo of her lost daughter Olivia, gone. Ryan appeared, rushing toward her with convincing horror on his face. Sarah, thank God you are safe. What happened? Sarah looked at her husband and knew with absolute certainty that he had set the fire. The locked deadbolt, the timing right after Jack's visit. This was Ryan eliminating evidence. The fire marshal's preliminary report called it an electrical fire. Old wiring, terrible accident, no signs of arson. But Sarah knew better. That same night, Dorothy Fletcher's apartment was burglarized. Her security system was stolen. The hard drives with the hallway footage, gone. Her iPad with the cloud backups, smashed beyond repair. When Sarah called Jack Donnelly, his voice was heavy with defeat. Without the physical evidence, Sarah, we cannot win. It is your word against his, and he has already built a narrative of you being mentally unstable. I am sorry, but I cannot ethically file a case I know we will lose. Sarah sat on a cot in the emergency shelter where they had taken her and Emma. She had lost everything. Her evidence, her credibility, her home, her hope. She was back to nothing. The next morning, Jack called with worse news. Ryan filed for emergency custody. There is a hearing tomorrow at 10. His lawyers are arguing you are a danger to yourself and Emma. With the fire, the staged break-in, your psychiatric hold, they have a strong case. What do I do? Show up, be calm, be rational. Pray the judge sees through his lies. Sarah hung up and looked at Emma sleeping beside her. Her daughter deserves so much better than this. She deserved a mother who could protect her, who could fight for her, who could win. Sarah felt herself breaking. She had survived the river. She had survived Ryan's manipulation, but now she was losing her child, and she had no weapons left to fight with. That afternoon, a woman approached Sarah in the shelter common area. She wore oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low. When she sat down beside Sarah, her voice was barely a whisper. "We need to talk." Sarah looked up. Recognition hit like a punch to the gut. Amber Pierce, Ryan's mistress. The woman who had helped push Sarah's car into the river. The woman who had watched Sarah drown and said nothing. "Get away from me," Sarah hissed. "Please, just listen." Amber pulled off her sunglasses. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut. "He tried to kill me too." Sarah stared at Amber, every instinct screaming not to trust the woman who had helped her husband try to murder her. But the fear in Amber's eyes was real, and so were the bruises. "What did he do to you?" Sarah asked. "I asked him for money. I told him I could not keep living like this, jumping every time I heard a car door or a phone ring. I said I needed to disappear for a while." Amber's voice shook. "He said no. I threatened to tell the truth. He broke 3 of my ribs and told me if I ever mentioned that night again, he would make sure I ended up like you. Except he would finish the job this time." Sarah's hand instinctively went to Emma sleeping in the carrier on her chest. "Why would I believe anything you say? You helped him push my car into the river." "I know. I know I am a terrible person. I was scared and stupid, and I made the worst choice of my life." Tears streamed down Amber's face. "But I have been recording him for months. Every conversation, every threat, every time he talked about the embezzlement or the bridge. I have everything on cloud storage that he does not know exists." Sarah's heart began to pound. "Show me." Amber pulled out a phone and opened an app. The screen filled with audio files, each one time-stamped and labeled. She pressed play on one. Ryan's voice filled the small space between them. "If Sarah wakes up, we will finish this. She cannot be allowed to talk. I will make sure she looks like a suicide, and this time there will not be any mistakes. Amber, you are in this now. If I go down, you go down with me." Sarah listened to the recording, her hands shaking. This was it. This was the evidence that could destroy Ryan. "There are dozens more," Amber said, "including audio from the night of the bridge, him planning it, me begging him not to do it, the sound of you screaming." She swallowed hard. "I am so sorry, Sarah. I am so sorry I did not stop him. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make this right." Sarah wanted to hate Amber. She wanted to tell her that sorry would never be enough. But right now, hatred was a luxury she could not afford. "We need Jack Donnelly," Sarah said, "my lawyer. If you are willing to testify, we can take him down." Jack arrived at the shelter an hour later. He listened to the recordings with an expression that grew darker with each passing minute. When the last file ended, he sat back and exhaled slowly. "This changes everything. We are no longer talking about a custody dispute. This is attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, federal charges. Ryan Morrison is going to prison for a very, very long time." "What do we do?" Sarah asked. "We build an airtight case. We go to the FBI and the media simultaneously. Ryan has connections in the police department, but he cannot corrupt everyone." Jack's eyes were sharp with the kind of focus Sarah remembered from her own days practicing law. "But we need to move fast. The custody hearing is tomorrow. Once Ryan has Emma, he will disappear with her, and we will never see either of them again." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. "He would not." "He has already tried to kill you twice," Jack said bluntly. "What makes you think he would not take his daughter and run to a country with no extradition treaty? He has the money, he has the connections, and he has nothing left to lose." They worked through the night, building their case. Jack contacted an investigative journalist he trusted, a woman named Nina Rodriguez, who had been trying to expose corruption in Manhattan's elite legal circles for years. Nina arrived at the shelter at midnight, her eyes bright with the hunger of a reporter who had just been handed the story of her career. "I can have this ready to publish in 12 hours, Nina said after reviewing the evidence. "But I need confirmation that the FBI is moving on this. I cannot run a story accusing Ryan Morrison of attempted murder without law enforcement backing." Jack nodded. "I have a contact at the FBI who owes me a favor, but even with this evidence, they will need time to build a case. Weeks, maybe months. We do not have weeks, Sarah said. The custody hearing is tomorrow morning. The three of them looked at each other, the impossible problem hanging in the air between them. Then Amber spoke. What if we force his hand, make him think he has won, make him get comfortable, and then destroy him when he least expects it? How? Sarah asked. He is having a charity gala tomorrow night at the Plaza Hotel. 300 guests. Every important person in Manhattan will be there. Maximum visibility. Amber's eyes met Sarah's. What if that is when we strike? Nina publishes her article right as Ryan is giving his speech. The FBI arrests him on stage in front of everyone. He gets the public humiliation he deserves, and there is no way for him to run. Jack frowned. That is extremely risky. What about the custody hearing? We lose it, Sarah said, understanding dawning. Or at least we let Ryan think he wins. He gets Emma taken from me tomorrow morning. He relaxes, thinks he is safe. Then tomorrow night, everything crashes down on him at once. Absolutely not, Jack said. I will not let you give up your daughter, even temporarily. What if she is not giving her up? Amber said slowly. What if the people who take Emma tomorrow are not actually taking her to Ryan? Understanding passed between the three women. It was risky. It was possibly illegal. It required perfect timing and cooperation from people in positions of power. But it might be the only way to save Emma and destroy Ryan at the same time. Jack made a call to his FBI contact, a woman named Special Agent Lisa Torres. They spoke for 20 minutes. When Jack hung up, he looked exhausted but determined. Agent Torres is in, but Sarah, you need to understand what this means. Tomorrow morning, federal marshals disguised as police officers are going to take Emma from you. You are going to have to let them. You are going to have to scream and cry and fight them while knowing it is all theater. Can you do that? Sarah looked down at Emma sleeping in her arms. The thought of letting anyone take her daughter, even for a single day, even knowing it was fake, made Sarah want to vomit. But if it meant Ryan would finally face justice, she would do it. Yes, Sarah whispered. I can do that. The custody hearing was held in a small courtroom that smelled like old wood and broken families. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table with Jack beside her, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Ryan sat across the aisle in an expensive suit, his lawyers flanking him like well-dressed sharks. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who knew he had already won. The judge, an older man named Harrison Cole, reviewed the case file with a frown. This is a very unusual situation, Mrs. Morrison. Do you understand why we are here today? Yes, Your Honor, Sarah said. Keep it together. This is all part of the plan. Your husband is petitioning for emergency custody based on concerns about your mental stability and your ability to care for your infant daughter safely. How do you respond? Sarah forced herself to meet the judge's eyes. I love my daughter more than anything in this world. I would never hurt her. My husband is lying to manipulate the system because I have evidence of his crimes. Ryan's lawyer stood immediately. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of paranoid delusion we have been discussing. Mrs. Morrison has a documented history of mental health issues following her suicide attempt last month. It was not a suicide attempt, Sarah said. He tried to kill me. The judge held up a hand. Mrs. Morrison, I understand you are under a great deal of stress, but these are very serious accusations, and I see no evidence in this file to support them. That is because he destroyed the evidence, Sarah said, letting real desperation creep into her voice. He set my apartment on fire. He staged a break-in. He is trying to make me look crazy so no one will believe me. The judge exchanged glances with Ryan's lawyers. Sarah could see the pity and doubt in his expression. This was a man who saw desperate mothers make wild accusations every day. He thought Sarah was just another one. Based on the evidence presented, Judge Cole said heavily, I am granting temporary emergency custody to Mr. Morrison. Mrs. Morrison will be allowed supervised visitation twice per week, pending a full psychiatric evaluation. No! Sarah lunged forward, the terror in her voice completely real. Please, you cannot take my baby. She is all I have left. Jack put a restraining hand on her arm. Your Honor, we intend to appeal this decision immediately. That is your right, Mr. Donnelly, but for now the child will be remanded to Mr. Morrison's custody. The judge looked toward the back of the courtroom. Bailiff, Please escort Mrs. Morrison out. Two uniformed officers approached Sarah. She recognized one of them, a woman who had given her the slightest nod when they made eye contact. Federal marshals, not regular police. "Ma'am, we need you to hand over the baby," the female marshal said gently. "No," Sarah sobbed, clutching Emma tighter. "Please, please do not take her. She needs me. She is only 3 weeks old." The marshals had to physically remove Emma from Sarah's arms. The baby began to cry, a thin wail that cut through Sarah like a knife. Sarah reached for her daughter, screaming, fighting against the hands that held her back. "Emma, please, my baby, please." It was all an act, but Sarah's pain was real. The only thing that kept her from completely breaking down was the knowledge that Emma was going somewhere safe, not to Ryan. The marshals carried the crying baby out of the courtroom. Sarah collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Jack put an arm around her shoulders. "She is safe," he whispered, too quiet for anyone else to hear. "Remember, she is safe," it commenced. Across the aisle, Ryan stood and straightened his tie. The satisfaction on his face was unmistakable. He had won. His problematic wife was discredited, and his daughter was in his custody. Now he could make both of them disappear at his leisure. What Ryan did not know was that Emma was not being taken to his penthouse. She was being taken to a safe house under federal protection. By the time Ryan realized his daughter was not where she was supposed to be, it would be too late. That night, Ryan Morrison stood in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in his finest tuxedo, preparing to accept an award for his charitable work. 300 of Manhattan's most powerful people filled the room, champagne glasses in hand. Amber stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing a red dress and watching her former lover with cold eyes. Sarah sat in an FBI surveillance van 2 blocks away, watching everything on a monitor. Nina Rodriguez was with her, laptop open, finger hovering over the button that would publish her expose. "Ryan Morrison is about to give his speech," Agent Torres said into her radio. "All units prepare to move on my signal." On the monitor, Sarah watched Ryan step up to the podium. He smiled warmly at the crowd. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This has been a difficult year for my family. As many of you know, my wife struggled with mental health issues that culminated in a tragic suicide attempt. But through it all, I have remained committed to giving back to this community that has given me so much." The crowd applauded politely. Ryan basked in their approval, completely unaware of what was coming. Nina hit publish. Her article went live on the Manhattan Herald's website with a headline that would trend nationally within minutes. "Manhattan attorney attempted murderer. Bauschheim to murder of pregnant wife. Recordings, witnesses reveal shocking truth." In the ballroom, phones began to buzz. Guests pulled out their devices and started reading. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ryan noticed the change in energy. "Is everything all right?" Someone in the crowd shouted, "You tried to kill your wife." Ryan's face went white. "What? No, that is absurd. She is mentally unstable. She makes up stories." The ballroom doors burst open. A dozen FBI agents in tactical gear streamed into the room, weapons drawn. "Ryan Morrison, you are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, embezzlement, and fraud," Agent Torres announced. "Get on the ground now." Ryan did not move. He looked around wildly, searching for an exit, for someone to help him, for any way out of the trap that had just sprung shut. "This is a mistake," he said weakly. "I am a victim here. My wife is the criminal." "We have recordings of you planning her murder," Agent Torres said coldly. "We have witness testimony. We have financial records. You are done, Mr. Morrison. Get on the ground." Still, Ryan did not comply. He looked out at the crowd, at his colleagues and clients and friends, all of them staring at him with horror and disgust. "She was going to destroy me," Ryan said, and for the first time his mask fully cracked. "I built this life. I earned everything I have. She was nobody before me, and she was going to take it all away because she could not just be grateful for what I gave her." The admission hung in the air. Every phone in the room was recording now. Every camera was pointed at Ryan Morrison having a public breakdown. Agent Torres nodded to her team. They moved forward and forced Ryan to the ground. He struggled, shouting obscenities, but within seconds he was handcuffed. As they walked him out in front of 300 witnesses and a dozen cameras, Ryan caught sight of Amber in the crowd. She met his eyes and did not look away. "You are welcome," she mouthed. In the surveillance van, Sarah watched Orion being led away and finally allowed herself to breathe. "It is over," Jack said. "He cannot hurt you anymore." Sarah closed her eyes. "Where is Emma?" "Safe. Agent Torres will take you to her now." They drove through the city to a small apartment in Queens where federal marshals had been watching over Emma all day. When Sarah walked through the door and saw her daughter sleeping peacefully in a portable crib, she collapsed to her knees and wept. "I am so sorry, baby girl," Sarah whispered, carefully lifting Emma into her arms. "Mama is so sorry you had to go through that. But you are safe now. We are both safe now." Emma opened her eyes and made a small sound, not crying, just acknowledging her mother's voice. Sarah held her daughter close and swore she would never let anything threaten her again. The trial of Ryan Morrison became the most watched legal proceeding in New York in a decade. Every major network covered it. The courtroom was packed every single day. Sarah sat in the front row, Jack Donnelly beside her, Emma sleeping in a carrier against her chest. She had refused to miss a single moment of Ryan's reckoning. The prosecution presented their case with methodical precision. Financial records showing $8.7 million in embezzled funds, audio recordings of Ryan planning Sarah's murder, testimony from the kayaker who pulled Sarah from the water, medical records showing injuries inconsistent with jumping from a bridge, and then Amber Pierce took the stand. She looked small sitting in the witness box, her voice barely above a whisper as she described the night on the bridge. But the jury heard every word. "Ryan told me if I did not help him, he would say I was the one who pushed the car. He said no one would believe me against him. So I helped him push." Amber's voice broke. I heard Sarah screaming. I saw her hands against the window. I will hear that sound for the rest of my life. Ryan's defense lawyer tried to paint Amber as a scorned mistress seeking revenge, but the recordings made that impossible. There was no way to spin Ryan's own voice admitting to attempted murder. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, she spoke clearly and calmly, letting the facts speak for themselves. She described discovering the embezzlement, the drive to the bridge, the moment she realized what Ryan intended to do. "I begged him to save me," Sarah said, looking directly at the jury. "I begged him to save our babies. He looked at me like I was nothing, like I was a problem to be eliminated. And then he walked away." Several jurors were crying. Even the judge looked shaken. Ryan's lawyers tried to argue temporary insanity, coercion, anything to reduce the charges. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder of Sarah Morrison. Attempted murder of 2 unborn children. Conspiracy, embezzlement, fraud, obstruction of justice. When the verdict was read, Ryan showed no emotion. He simply stared straight ahead, a broken man who had finally run out of lies. The judge sentenced him to 35 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. He would be 73 years old before he could even apply for early release. Additionally, Ryan was ordered to pay $12 million in restitution to the clients he had defrauded. His law license was revoked. Morrison and Associates dissolved, with several of his partners facing their own investigations for knowing about the embezzlement and doing nothing. As marshals led Ryan away in chains, he looked back at Sarah one last time. She met his gaze without flinching. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction, just the quiet strength of someone who had survived the unsurvivable. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Sarah and Jack. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in their faces. "Mrs. Morrison, how do you feel about the verdict?" Sarah adjusted Emma in her carrier and spoke clearly. "I feel grateful that the justice system worked. I feel relieved that my daughter and I are safe. And I feel hope that other women in similar situations will see this case and know that even powerful men can be held accountable for their crimes." "What will you do now?" "I'm going to focus on healing, on raising my daughter, and on using my law degree to help other survivors of domestic violence and abuse." The press conference lasted another 10 minutes before Jack gently guided Sarah away from the cameras. They climbed into a waiting car and drove away from the courthouse, leaving the circus behind. "You did it," Jack said. "You served, you fought back, and you won." Sarah looked down at Emma sleeping peacefully against her chest. "We won. I could not have done this without you. without Amber, without Agent Torres, without Dorothy Fletcher and her security cameras. It took a village to take down Ryan Morrison. Speaking of Dorothy, Jack said with a small smile, she wants to know if you will appear on her YouTube channel. Apparently, Fletcher's Neighborhood Watch is up to 60,000 subscribers now. Sarah laughed, a real laugh, the first one in months. Tell her I will think about it. 6 months after the trial, Sarah Morrison walked into her new office in Brooklyn. The sign on the door read, Morrison Legal Advocates, because everyone deserves to be believed. The space was small but bright, with large windows that let in the morning sun. Emma, now 10 months old, played with blocks and a portable playpen in the corner while Sarah prepared for her first client meeting. There was a knock on the door. A young woman entered, nervous and scared, carrying a folder of documents. Are you Sarah Morrison? The woman asked. I am. Please sit down. You are safe here. Over the next hour, Sarah listened to another woman's story of abuse, manipulation, and survival. She took notes, asked questions, and began building a case. It was familiar work, but now it meant something deeper. She was not just practicing law. She was giving other women the justice she had fought so hard to achieve for herself. Jack Donnelly stopped by that afternoon. He had been elected district attorney 2 months earlier, running on a platform of prosecuting powerful abusers. His first major case had been against one of Ryan's former law partners. How was your first day? Jack asked, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk. Exhausting, hopeful. Right, Sarah smiled. Thank you for believing me when no one else would. You made it easy. You never stopped fighting. Jack hesitated, then added, I wanted to ask you something. There is a fundraiser next weekend for the women's shelter where you stayed. Would you want to go? With me? Sarah studied him. They had been dancing around this for months, the growing connection between them, the quiet understanding that had developed through trauma and triumph. Like a date? Sarah asked. If you want it to be, or just as friends. No pressure. Sarah glanced at Emma, who was babbling happily to herself. She thought about Ryan and everything he had taken from her. But she also thought about everything she had gained, her strength, her independence, her purpose. I would like that, Sarah said. A date, but slow, okay? I am still figuring out who I am outside of survival mode. Slow is good. I can do slow. That weekend, Sarah drove out to Bear Mountain Bridge. She parked at the overlook where Ryan had pushed her car over the edge, the place where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. She carried Emma to the guardrail, now reinforced after the accident that had been covered in every newspaper in New York. A small memorial plaque had been placed there, in memory of Olivia Morrison, gone too soon but never forgotten. Hi, baby girl, Sarah whispered, placing flowers by the plaque. Your sister is growing so fast. She has your nose, I think. Or maybe that is wishful thinking. Sarah's voice caught. I wish you could have met her. I wish you could have grown up together. But I promise I will tell Emma about you every single day. You will always be part of our family. A breeze rustled through the trees. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself feel the grief fully, without fear, without shame. She had earned this moment of peace. When she opened her eyes again, Emma was reaching toward the sky, her tiny fingers grasping at nothing, or maybe at something Sarah could not see. Come on, sweet girl, Sarah said, kissing Emma's forehead. Let's go home. As Sarah drove away from the bridge, her phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy Fletcher. Just posted a new video reviewing doorbell cameras. Featured your case as an example of why everyone needs home security. Already at 20,000 views. You're famous. Sarah smiled and sent back a reply. You are going to be more famous than me at this rate. When do I get my guest appearance? The response came immediately. Next week. I am calling it How One Woman's Survival Inspired a Nation. Bring Emma, the audience loves babies. Sarah laughed and set her phone down. She drove through the city as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the rearview mirror, she could see Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat. Her daughter, her survivor, her second chance. Ryan Morrison was in a federal prison in California, reportedly attacked twice by other inmates who took particular offense to men who tried to murder pregnant women. He had no visitors. No one wrote to him. His family had disowned him publicly. Amber Pierce had entered witness protection and relocated to Oregon. She worked at a nonprofit helping women leave abusive relationships. She sent Sarah a card every few months, always the same message. Still trying to make it right. Thank you for letting me try. Dorothy Fletcher had become a minor celebrity. Her YouTube channel, Fletcher's Neighborhood Watch, reaching over 100,000 subscribers. She reviewed security systems, gave safety tips, and told stories about catching bad neighbors. Her catchphrase, "Stay safe, stay nosy, stay one step ahead," appeared on t-shirts and coffee mugs. And Sarah Morrison, the woman who was supposed to die in the Hudson River, was alive. She was thriving. She was raising her daughter in safety and love. She was helping other women find their voices and their strength. She had survived the unsurvivable. She had faced down her abuser and won. She had turned her trauma into purpose and her pain into power. Ryan had tried to erase her. Instead, she had become unforgettable. As Sarah pulled into the parking lot of her modest apartment in Brooklyn, Emma stirred and opened her eyes. She looked at her mother and smiled, that perfect toothless grin that made everything worthwhile. "We made it, baby girl," Sarah whispered. "We really made it." She carried Emma inside, locked the door behind them, and began the evening routine of feeding and bathing and bedtime stories. It was ordinary. It was safe. It was everything. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. She thought about the woman she had been before the bridge. Naive, trusting, willing to overlook red flags because she loved someone. She was not that woman anymore. She had been broken and drowned and reborn. She had learned that survival was not just about staying alive. It was about choosing to keep living, keep fighting, keep believing that justice was possible, even when the world said otherwise. Sarah touched the window glass, feeling the cool surface against her palm. Somewhere out there were other women in the same situation she had been in. Trapped, afraid, convinced no one would believe them. To those women, Sarah wanted to say, document everything. Tell someone you trust. Do not confront alone. And know that even when it feels impossible, even when the person hurting you seems too powerful to stop, justice is possible. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes it is justice perfected. Sarah turned away from the window and checked on Emma one more time. Her daughter slept peacefully, safe and loved, and surrounded by warmth. Tomorrow, Sarah would go back to her office and help another survivor. She would take another call from a terrified woman who thought no one would believe her story. She would build another case, fight another battle, win another victory. But tonight she would rest. She would heal. She would simply exist in this moment of hard-won peace. Because Sarah Morrison, the pregnant wife who came back alive, had done more than survive. She had won. Sarah Morrison's story proves something powerful. The truth always finds a way to surface, even when it is buried under lies, money, and manipulation. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it gave you hope that even powerful people can be held accountable, do me a favor, hit that like button so more people can find this story. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in Sarah's position. Would you have trusted Amber? Would you have staged that custody hearing? And if you want more stories like this, stories about people who refuse to stay victims, who fight back and win, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Because every week I bring you real-life drama that is stranger, darker, and more satisfying than any fiction. Remember, you are stronger than you think. Your voice matters, and your story deserves to be heard. I will see you in the next one. Stay strong out there.